Thank you so much for making time. And I think, in fact, this is very special for me in the Cloud Pilot podcast because this is the first ever in person podcast that I'm shooting.
Wow.
So, thank you so much for making this special and for making this happen.
We feel privileged with this.
It's my pleasure. Maybe let's start this conversation by going through a round of introductions. So, definitely, we're going to talk about sales and client success in cloud. So we'll just go through a round of introduction. Maybe Ankit, if you can start.
So I'm Ankit and I'm Client Success Manager for a cloud consulting firm. And I've been working in tech sector for last 10 odd years, in the cloud for last 5 years.
Awesome. So Vaibhav.
Yeah, so I'm Vaibhav. I am currently working as a cloud consultant. This is a sales role. I primarily deal with digital natives and a little bit of SME traditional businesses. I have close to 8 years of experience, and I have worked with a lot of cloud deals in India and Middle East.
Awesome. So Sanjay.
My name is Sanjay, and carrying total 13 years of experience, and I would say the majority of it was part of cloud sales only. Last 8-9 years, I've been part of cloud partnership ecosystem. So yeah, currently also in my current role that it is only doing cloud sales, technology sales, solutioning.
Awesome. So thank you so much, guys. Maybe let's start with this generic question, which most people also have in their mind, which is about what are these some of the biggest trends that is going on with these different client segments. I know for a fact that you all work with specific segments. Now, what are those trends that you observe in different segments? Maybe if each of you could put down your perspective.
Sure. So I can share some experience with digital natives, tech startups, and also small companies that work primarily in the traditional space. So in the traditional space, obviously, there are companies who have invested a lot in traditional architecture. Say, for example, servers and all. They are very keen to invest in data and AI services, particularly because with the advent of Gen AI, there is a lot of buzzword, and they don't want to be left behind. So without changing their infrastructure, because there has been a lot of investment, they for sure want to try out how they can leverage the data that they have been collecting so far. Other than that, in digital native segments, the smaller companies generally have lesser inertia, so they are open to experimenting on different cloud services, like say migrating to a different cloud vendor to save some to save some cost or to improve functionality and stuff. But yeah, that trend decreases when you move up the chain, like you move towards enterprises or relatively larger companies, so they have relatively larger inertia as well, so they want to stick around with the same OEM provider. So that is from a very high level the trend that I have seen so far.
Awesome. So what are your perspectives?
So yes, I will give you my viewpoint from the enterprise standpoint. Yeah, and within the enterprise, I have seen many manufacturing enterprises, right? So the understanding is very clear, right? Not going to cloud is not an option now, right? There are always some workloads, right, which you cannot manage on premise, right?
Yeah.
Depending on the criticality of the applications, right, there are always some workloads which has to be cloud native, right? So yes, and I think over the last couple of years, right, there is a very large push for manufacturing customers to do this OT/IT integrations, right? Because data is the new oil, right?
Yeah.
And if there is a lot of humongous data, right, you cannot keep it on premise, right? It has to migrate to cloud, right?
Yep.
The cloud adoption is, I will guess it's a, term or maybe, future or whatever you say, right? It is happening. Within India, right, it is still, there is a larger portion of enterprises, right, which are still in the experimentation phase. But yes, over the course of next 4 to 5 years, we will see a lot of workloads, data sitting on cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in fact, even I have seen this trend of cloud running for the last 10 years at least. I think I have heard of the term cloud perhaps in 2013 or something, when we were having Apple's iCloud and all that. I think that was the first time and I've even heard of that word coming into the technology standpoint. But I think maybe from 2015 onwards, I have interacted with a lot of people who say, they have been kind of transitioning to their cloud roles back in early 2017s. So I think perhaps this could be that technology which has been going through for at least a couple of decades now.
Yeah.
Ankit, what is your viewpoint?
So I would rather say not specific to particular one segment, but in general, a few things that I think I've been observing lately is that one thing that clients are looking beyond is that if you go back 5 years, 2018-19, when large companies they started their cloud journey, so they were happy to being stuck with one of the large cloud service provider. So whether the hyperscaler was AWS, Google Cloud came late into the picture, or Azure, people were happy stick to one client and then stick to one vendor and do that. But right now, I feel that big enterprises, at least, who have a good footprint on cloud, or they intend to have a larger footprint on cloud, they do not want to have a problem of vendor lock-in. So, and Sanjay will comment on that many of the large clients that he has been working with, they have a decent amount of footprint on Amazon. They also want to experiment on Google. They are happy if there are some good features or some good better pricing available on Azure. So it is not that I am with Amazon, AWS, and I want to stay with AWS always.
Yeah.
So we know that, and you know much more than we. Like a lot of our customers who have their databases on AWS or on premise, but when they come to the data analysis part of it, the analytical part of it, they are open to move their workload to BigQuery because BigQuery is a good product. It is not that I'm with Amazon and every managed service of AWS am I supposed or forced to use. No, it is no longer that, because I think the world has become more diffused. The boundary, it was more difficult earlier because people used to think that you need to have specific kind of knowledge if you are to use AWS, and then the same kind of knowledge cannot be used on GCP. But eventually, you and me know that the basics of the cloud are still the same. If your engineers or if your technical guys are good in one cloud, they will be able to understand and implement that on other clouds.
Yeah, the stigma has been removed.
Yes, that has been removed.
The
So
familiarity has improved. Rather, yeah.
and most of the so companies that we work on, so like we are people who help people migrate to cloud. We are also not specific to one cloud partner, or our knowledge base or skill set cannot be that hey, I'm just good on AWS. Then you will not be able to survive because the same client can have multiple asks.
Yeah.
And I know for Sanjay can tell more. He works for some of the large clients, and his clients have asked him, okay, I'm good. I'm happy that you have good Google skill set, but I also want you to bring in some Azure skill set to me. I also want to bring in some AWS skill set, even Oracle skill set to me. And that's how this is the world.
It's a very, very valid point, Ankit, right? So, as you mentioned, right, clients are very smart now, right?
Yes.
They know, right, what is there in AWS or maybe Azure or maybe GCP, right? So, they know what is the best of all three.
They know which
hypervisors,
service is
right?
good in which provider.
And in fact, like
Correct.
recently, right, clients are, becoming, I would say, more evolved, right? Because they are now evaluating private clouds also, right? There was an era, right, where private clouds offerings were not that strong, right? But now all these private cloud providers, right, they have kind of latched upon these NVIDIA chips, right? They have built so many powerful data centers, right, that they are taking market share out of these hypervisors, right? Because their cost is like 1/5, 1/6 of the OEMs, right? So it is happening. The shift is already happening. But yes, clients are very, very clever now.
I think everybody is kind of moving towards a collaboratory environment.
Correct.
So, yeah, and also to comment on that, like earlier people used to think that even if and once they have started their cloud journey, they would be married to the cloud. But then there is also one thing that people are also open to moving back from cloud to on-prem as well.
Yeah.
In case there have been examples, there are a lot of large companies who are utilizing cloud only for say infrastructure purposes or storage purposes. They have also seen the benefits of moving back from cloud. So the stigma is not there. Obviously, the market has evolved, people have evolved, and there is a lot of openness. So, and then if people are moving towards cloud, they want to get best of both the worlds or best of all the worlds.
So, to what extent or to what degree is sales important? And maybe Ankit, you can also expand on my next point is how important is client success after a sale is done?
From sales standpoint, right? I think in my world, right, in enterprise world, right, clients are very mature, right? We cannot go to them that this is our offering, right? There is no such sales in this world now, right? So, but in terms of mature sales, right, I would say that you have to understand where customer is in their current journey of digital transformation, right? Obviously, whatever you have, right, as a partner or as a service provider, as a SI, right, in some or other form, customer might be already doing that, right? You have to understand that, right? Sales becomes very important, right? Once you know the customer, even if it is greenfield or brownfield, right? You have to understand the customer, what they are kind of exploring in the market, right?
So I'll just interrupt you for a moment. So, for the audience who might be hearing these terms for the first time, so what does a greenfield mean and what does a brownfield mean?
So greenfield, I'll very in layman terms, right? That greenfield is, suppose I'm working in company X as a cloud partner, right? And it is a net new account form for me, right? Which I have not tapped yet, right? So this is a very
absolutely new.
exactly right. So this account is very new for me, and I have no services, no sales in this particular account. I will term it as a greenfield account for me, right? Brownfield is something, right, where we have already done some services, we have already done some sales, right, and it's time to farm the account, right, to kind of build more relationships, more services, right? So these category of accounts we call brownfield.
Yeah.
Right.
So just to add on to it, so greenfield and brownfield, what he referred to was from a sales perspective, not from an implementation perspective, because there are greenfield and brownfield implementation. So that's the difference. Here, what we were talking about. So from a sales perspective, what I would like to add on to it was obviously there has been this term consultative selling has been thrown a lot. So in terms of cloud, since the market has matured, which we discussed earlier, cloud adoption should always coincide with or align with the business strategy or the digital transformation strategy. I, for example, can't go to a customer in today's time and sell them anything or sell them any service or any product for that matter, only because I think so, because that's not the case today.
Right.
So, for example, the question why has become much more comprehensive, or rather, the answer to the why has become much more comprehensive. That why actually you want to move to cloud? Do you want to take your data? Do you want to improve your availability? It's not just like earlier. I believe there was a time when companies were adapting to cloud just to make to the headline that we are adapting to newer strategies, just the way today Gen AI is right in the market. So there was a time when people were saying that we are investing it, or for that matter, automobiles are investing in EVs, right? So that we don't left behind, we make to the headlines and all. But today companies are like trying to investigate it thoroughly, that what they want to achieve in the short term, in the long term, in all the three horizons, near term, mid term, short and long term, with cloud adoption. So with whatever services they want to. So for example, if you want to take your data, do you have any AI use cases in mind? What do you want to do with that information? So everything needs to be aligned with the business goals in today's world. And I believe that was a very good segue, as in with sales, how is client success very closely knitted function in today's world when we talk about digital transformation. So that Ankit can talk more about. So for example, client success, particularly in conjunction with cloud adoption, was an after sales thought. A few years back, like once you have onboarded the customer, they are very much happy with a new shiny thing, and then there is some guy who is trying to preach to the choir that this is now you have bought in, what to do with it, right? But now the client success needs to come in very early as well, to go into the integrities, right? So Ankit can probably talk a bit more on that lines.
So this sales, client success, I would go a little more further. Delivery, even post delivery when you give a management support and kind of thing. We are all one team, and the whole idea, the whole motive of that team is to win and maintain. So win the territory and guard the territory in terms of sales language. Win the territory and guard the territory. However, it is not in a waterfall model. Is that sales will go do its job and then move out. Delivery and client success will come and then they will start the job. No, it's not like that. It's like a team. So you need to have, so like a cricket match, you need to have batsmen, you need to have bowlers. But sometimes in the field, for you to succeed, you need to work in conjunction with each other.
Yeah.
So there have been times, and I work with both of them very closely on account. So there have been times when the client success team works along with the account team, the sales team, right from the start of the opportunity, right from when you're working on the opportunity, trying to understand what does the client know, understand the requirement and everything. Sometimes we come a little late in the picture when the sales team has already done their job. The analogy I was giving, so sometimes the sales team is the more fancied, the Sachin Tendulkar, Virat Kohli, the front-end top order batsman. But sometimes the bowlers also need to come and stitch those partnerships if things don't go good. So it will. So what I say is that whether you use the name sales, client success, for me, it's all one closely knit team if it has to be successful. We are all with those one motive of solving the client's problem, making the client happier.
Correct.
So and this terms client success partner invariably in the industry, in other companies, CSPs are people who do front end sales also. So what I'm trying to say that the lines are blurred.
Yeah.
We are all together. The whole idea, as I said, try to understand client's problem, solve client's problem, and then try to make the clients technically and everywhere happier.
It's basically like there is no definitive boundary drawn.
Correct.
So I think where client success team becomes very important, right? There are circumstances where unseen problems occur, at customer end also, and even they are not prepared for such problems, even the sales team, they don't have the right answer for such problems, so I think it's a critical bridge between the technical and salesperson that CSP provides to customer, whenever there is such unforeseen problem, they can get their hands dirty, help the customer navigate those trouble times, the problems might be very severe, in nature, but CSP is always there, to support the customer so that they have the confidence, that okay, it's not just sales and technical people, there is a team which is dedicated to solve their problems, so I think that from that standpoint, client success teams becomes very, very important for a client.
So previously when I used to work as a cloud engineer, salespeople just purely were focused on sales. They were not thinking about, what would be better for the customer in the first place. Their first priority was to close and win a customer, and then there would be client success team who would look after and then find some improvements.
Correct.
But definitely happy to see that the trend is changing and the way how it is perceived has also shifted to a very good level. Coming to the understanding of clients' needs, how does it differ when we go from different market segments? For example, like we are approaching sales, especially Vaibhav is looking at the startups, mid markets, and Sanjay is looking at the enterprise sector. So how does these approaches differ for each of these segments while understanding those clients' needs?
So it absolutely varies from segment to segment. So for example, if so I'll talk a little bit about the digital natives and tech startups. On one end of the spectrum, there would be very smaller, like relatively smaller companies who are just starting up. They have a very small team. Okay. And for a startup, it's imperative that once they secure funding, they have to go and capture the market, get the best ROI out of that funding, right? So there are peaks, like in terms of their spend or in terms of their activity, cloud activity. And then on the other end of spectrum, there are relatively established companies, although they are also digitally native, born in cloud. But now they are relatively stable. They know that where their market is. So for the startups that are just starting up, they are in the phase of expansion. So there is a lot of activity, and then they are in a lot of experimental mode. So they come up with a lot of expectations when, as a salespeople, we approach them or they approach us. They are in an experimental mode, so they expect companies to deliver a lot of things. So particularly in partner ecosystem, because product companies generally position their products, but the onus is on the partners, like in partner ecosystem, to help them get the maximum value out of those products. Okay, so for those startups, like how to stitch a solution with products and the services, so that's key. For relatively established companies who have whose growth is like entered a linear phase or something like that, for them obviously cost optimization, security posture, working on the boring things, that there is a lot of continuous activity involved. I believe that is where they invest a lot, and that's where they want to explore more. And then on the business lines, like if someone is in expansion mode, they would look to expand to different markets. So what are the data laws particular to a particular country or a region? How do we, which is the best provider in terms of availability, services and all, so how does a particular cloud provider align with their business goals for that particular region? To give you an example, say as a company I want to expand to Middle East. There is Google only present in KSA. KSA might be a strategic market for me. My funding is coming from, say, the some big venture capital firm based out of KSA, right? So if there is no other cloud provider, even though I am on AWS, I will shift to Google. So all those technicalities come into picture. So on the business front, obviously there is these kinds of conversation going on the technical front. I told you. In the traditional segment, the salesperson has to do a lot of hand holding in the smaller traditional companies who are just starting up on cloud and all. So a lot of hand holding is involved. Even though you tell them the benefits of different services, you have to show them and then make sure that everything works. So I believe these are some of the changes, or this has been my experience from a very high level.
Yeah, I think from understanding client requirement, right? I think there has to be a lot of groundwork that needs to go in before you go for a client meeting, right? Obviously, means it is important that whom you are meeting, right? Whether it's a technical decision maker, right, or a business decision maker, right? So there is a checklist that you have to prepare, right, before going to meet an enterprise or maybe startup or maybe mid-market customer, right? From enterprise standpoint, right, there is a long list of decision makers, right, that you have to pass through, right? So at every step, right, you have to be very clear that what questions you need to ask, to which questions you need very clear answer from every decision maker, right? Whether it's budget, timeline, right, a number of resources, TCO, ROI, right? So I think these 4 5 things, right, which at every level you need to be very clear of, right? If maybe one person, right, derails your conversation, right, that is a very huge red flag, right? Because in an enterprise, even if there is not a, if one person denies the approval for a sales deal, right, the entire conversation can get derailed very easily. So I think a lot of research, preparation, background work has to go while you're cooking a large enterprise deal. And then obviously, right, you are selling not to a single person, you are selling to a team of 4 5 or even more decision makers, right? So understanding every person's point of view, right, from the deal standpoint, it is very very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree to that. In fact, I too have kind of had to switch myself into different shoes when I was in pre-sales, when I was talking to different levels of customers. I used to talk to even CTOs. I used to also talk to engineering managers. I also had to talk to developers. So the conversation varies according to the level, because we can't talk tech to the business decision makers, the CFO, or
Correct.
CEO. They look for more about business, how they can bring in new revenue.
Correct.
They don't really care about what is that special solution that you're bringing that will say improve their application, but what is that improvement that we are bringing, and with that improvement, what will what how much money will they make? Fundamentally, the CEO is worried about that.
Correct. And in a relatively smaller company, the engineering manager or the CFO and the CTO, they would be more or less aligned.
Yeah.
But as you approach a larger enterprise, there is a lot more bureaucracy, for the lack of better words, and people have different motives and motivations as well.
Yeah.
So you need to be better prepared. You need to look at the ROI or the value from a very holistic perspective.
To understand client's need, so out of very factor, what we need to understand, which is the size of the company. So larger company. So I have spent a decent amount of my life in my previous avatar in a very large organization. So larger companies, the roles are defined. There are strict boundary walls. So the requirement will also be confined to those roles. So someone from the finance organization will not talk much about the tech part of it. But in the small, I don't know, in the new age companies, I will not use the word small, the new age companies, there are no strict guidelines. So maybe 3 or 4 people have started who are the co-founders. Today, one of the guys is CFO, but he might have a very good engineering background. He's managing the finances of the company, but he will understand tech also. He will understand the marketing part of it because he's also concerned about the funding part of it. He has a holistic view of the whole organization. So when you go and talk to that person, as Sanjay said, you need to be prepared because he might not just be constrained by the questions related to the finance part of it, but he might also ask that, how will you going to run my campaign, and will there be some more something marketing metrics and all that? Because you understand, new age companies, the roles are there are no strict guidelines.
I think this is where the SRE element comes as relevant, because we need to set down those processes.
Correct.
And who is responsible for what.
Correct. Yeah.
What are some of those challenges that you can kind of anticipate, and or what are those common challenges that you face that okay, this is going to be a challenge, I have to prepare this way to tackle it?
So my biggest challenge is I'm paid less. So I don't know how to counter that. So if you can give me a way to monetize some of your YouTube podcasts, I'm pretty sure that after this podcast is going to be really hit. So then, if you send some of my
Absolutely, yes.
a lot of the challenges are going to be yes.
Yes, if I get revenue from this episode, I'm definitely going to share it.
Oh,
Great. So, challenges, I believe, the cloud space in general, because it has evolved, it has become much more competitive as compared to what it was a few years back. So there are a lot more partners in play. There are a lot more OEMs in play. Even the traditional companies who used to sell boxes. So sorry for the lack of better words. Traditional server systems and all. They have also expanded their offerings a little bit. So the space in general has become a lot more competitive. People have become a lot more aware. So it's not for good or bad, but then you have, as a salesperson, you have to always be on your toes to crack a conversation, to bring an opportunity home. So those are the things in general. And other than that, there are, talking just with respect to cloud, as a salesperson, you can't always end up selling cloud only for the sake of selling it. As a salesperson and as an ethical salesperson, you also have to look into the factors that what is the value and business value that this transformation is going to get to the customer. And particularly about me, if I am not sold on the business value that this entire transformation or this sales is going to bring, I unfortunately can't convince the customer as well. Right. So those are some challenges in general from a very high level perspective. And then in terms of, there is just one more thing that I would like to add, and probably everyone can expand on it. A lot of times what happens is there is a lot of noise in the market regarding certain things. So for example, AI, there is a lot of noise in the market right now as well regarding Gen AI and AI. Many people want to try those things, but then what happens is that there is an unrealistic expectation that is being set. So a few years back it was about data. Like everyone wanted to set up a data lake, and they thought that
Going
somehow
behind the
Huh.
trend.
Yeah. So everyone wanted to set up a data lake because they thought that they will end up doing magically something with their data and their value would exceed. And then what happens is that as salesperson, you end up selling some certain services and it comes crashing down upon you. The same CTO is like, we invested so much. Where is the ROI? But they fail to realize that a lot of things are fad at some point in time. So it's better to evaluate better and not go behind all the trends. So yeah.
So Sanjay, how do you view it?
So I think from challenges standpoint, right? I think there are multiple uh, incidents, right, where client have come back to me, right, that okay, this is something which the team is not delivering, right? So
Not meeting the delivery
exactly,
expectations.
right. So it's a very common thing nowadays, right? Because clients are very very smart, right? They know how to squeeze the delivery team, right, and get even more out of it, right? Whatever is written in the agreement, right? So I think from sales standpoint, it becomes very important for us to customer, kind of understand, why they're asking for more, in terms of delivery or maybe some success criteria, whatever it is, right? And then have a very transparent communication with the customer that this is what we promised to you, right? And the role of project management team becomes very very important, right, in these scenarios, right? Because well, if you're aware of the fact, right, the larger SIs, their major revenues comes from CRs, change request, right? Right. And so it is a challenge, but it is also a very potential for people like sales and account managers to get into, right, tap the right revenue from existing customers. So it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to kind of get more services, more footprint in the customer.
It's kind of like a challenge, but can be also be considered as a
Exactly.
Opportunities.
Awesome. So maybe let's also talk about the career perspective. Maybe my question to you would
Very
be
interesting. Nice.
not the typical question of why you chose sales, but I would rather ask, who should try sales and who should try client success. It's good. Perhaps, I have also talked to a lot of people, and as you might have also encountered people asking you, how to transition into that role. So, what are those indicators which you feel is makes a person should go for a sales or a client success? What are those qualities in a person? Maybe if I can rephrase it, or who should basically?
So I'll give you this answer in the purview of cloud sales and cloud client success partner. Client success partner could be in any field. So let me put this answer in the context of that. Okay, you are working as a client success partner in a company which is offering cloud services and data and AI services. Okay, let's put it that way, primarily cloud-based services. First thing is that if you want to do well as a CSP, which I believe I'm doing,
You are absolutely.
so then first is that you should have that keen urge to understand technology. And when I say understand technology, is it not just understanding the functional value of it? You should be ready to go a little deep down. And I'm not telling you should go and take 100 of certification there. If you are able to do it, nothing like that. But the whole idea is you should spend some time in understanding the technology to understand how exactly things work in the cloud world. If there is to give an example, if there is a client that you are working with, so you should be able to try and spend some time with your delivery team, with your managed services team, and trying to understand what are the key challenges that client face, and if you are able to solve them. So you should not be an advocate who comes and talk about some fancy consultating words. You should have that keen urge to understand, and also what you say, get your hand dirty kind of thing. You should have that thing, because that is important for you to understand exactly what the problems client faces, and because the expectation from you is different from what is the expectation from an account manager or sales guy. They expect you to be a little more I would say, technologically sensitive. You should be able to go and talk to the technical team from the client side
Got
in
it.
their language.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that I feel is the difference. Rest, I think both of us are very closely teams
Yeah.
which work very closely to each other with the sole motive of, as I told you, with the sole motive of trying to understand client's requirement, making the client happy.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So to answer your question about who should try sales, particularly in the cloud space, so I would say first I would answer like why try sales in the cloud space, because there is a lot of action happening. A lot of companies are undergoing digital transformation and they are taking initiatives. So a lot is happening in the cloud space in particular, and in space you get to work with a lot of different companies. So for example, you also get exposure to fintechs, you get exposure to edtechs, and you get exposure to different industry segments, and try to see their journey from a typical traditional company to a digitally native company. So that's where that's a very unique experience that you can get. Now it's a very generic answer like why you should do sales, because if you are someone who doesn't want to do like a boring desk job, and you are okay with taking a little bit of pressure, a little bit of responsibility, then I believe, and then you have decent communication skills and you like interacting with people, solving their problems, I believe those are kind of, if you are able to associate yourself with this kind of personality, then obviously you should try sales. To give you an example, when I started my engineering, I was a debater myself. I like talking to people. I like negotiation part of it. So that is something that made me choose a career in sales. I also had a different career path also. I would have become a software developer as well. So but then I choose sales. So I believe that's why you should do sales, and particularly in cloud field. Yeah. So Sanjay,
Yeah,
anything to add?
interesting, very interesting. About. Yeah. So my career journey, right, also started with a technical background, right. First couple of years, I was doing coding, right. But now again, it's a very personal opinion, right. Nothing to go against with any technical people, right. But I didn't like it, right. Maybe for some reason, but I felt very bored, right, sitting at a computer desk doing PHP, Java, and for me it was getting day by day a very kind of very very boring job, right.
Same goes.
Yeah,
for me.
yeah. Yeah. But I have known people, right, who my classmates, right, from BTech, who just do coding, right, and even there are a couple of people, right, who who maybe were not able to pass through, or what I call it, they faced year back, right, third year, fourth year, but they were so good in coding, right, they are now sitting in US, in Google or Facebook, right, earning thousands of dollars just because of coding, right.
Yeah.
It's a very personal choice, right. So but I didn't like it, so I switched my profile, right, to sales. And I think there are 3-4 core qualities, right, which I think every salesperson should have, right. I think first thing is networking, right. Networking is very very kind of essential ingredient of this sales profile, right. If you're not able to network, then I feel it's very hard for you to do sales, right. Second thing is, right, you have to be kind of it's just not the knowledge of books, right, that you can carry to a customer meeting, right. You have to read a lot.
Yeah.
Right. Like Vaibhav said, right, the technology is evolving at a pace beyond our comprehension, right. There is so much explosion happening in terms of technology, right, and you cannot just sit and do the same sales every day. You have to update yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm giving a lecture to a person who has done so many certifications, right. But you get my point, right.
Yeah.
So I think that awareness, that knowledge, right, it is another thing which helps you to be at the top of your sales career, right. And then third thing is, right, is your you have to enjoy it, right. Otherwise, you won't be
Absolutely.
able to survive the sales profile, right? It is one of the toughest job, I would say. It is very demanding, right? There are very clear, KPIs where you have to deliver, right? For me, it is, kind of very motivating. I feel that it is happening, right? I have to deliver this, I have to learn this, I have to go and meet this customer, right? So I think these three things are very important for anybody who wants to kind of, come into a sales profile role.
I think, in fact, I can very much resonate to it because, just as I mentioned earlier, I used to be very bored doing this engineering coding stuff. And in fact, from the different levels of profiles that I have been in, I have been in delivery, I've been in pre-sales, now I'm in sales. So throughout all these, I think pre-sales was the toughest that I felt because, it also involved an aspect of managing both the teams. So you
Yeah.
have to find a middle ground between the sales team and the delivery. So that was one of the hardest part. But I think again it comes at par with the sales job because there are a lot of variables that is involved because it's
Yeah.
all about people.
All about people.
If
And
a
you
sales-
never know how people will
yeah,
react. Yeah.
absolutely. So if a deal has to close, people have to say yes.
Yes.
But if it's a delivery, it's just a process.
Yeah.
If some technical issue happens, then we can solve it. It's absolutely solvable.
Correct.
But I
It
think,
becomes a game of probability
yeah,
for sales.
so I think that is that humanistic part that makes sales a tough job.
Yeah, and then just to add on to it, like obviously a lot of people would have read this online, but every job becomes a sales job after a certain point in time.
Correct.
If you are into delivery for say an SI or a services company, after a certain point in time, say you become a director level person, you are expected to bring business. If you are a management consultant, when you reach a partner level, you are expected to bring business. You are doing sales. If you are into investment banking, after a certain level, like you become a VP or something, you are expected to bring business. So every job after a certain extent becomes a sales job only. So sales as a skill is a very good skill to learn. And if there is someone who's listening to this and they are just starting their career, so sales is not a good, not a bad thing to start their career with. Yeah.
We talked about the sales challenges during this process. But since you are in the client success role, you would be more aligned with the delivery side of things. So what are those challenges that you face during the delivery, during this implementation? And
Yeah, even post implementation.
yeah. So how do you get to solve those problems, or how do you approach solving those problems?
So there's the first and foremost thing is this: first we need to understand and recognize that there is a problem, which many times we acknowledge that too late. So there's a golden rule which I would say, which I've read, and I think I try to implement in all of our engagements, is that whenever you migrate to cloud, then you migrate your infrastructure to cloud, or you migrate your services that are running on your on-prem to cloud. You should not migrate your problems to cloud. Because if there are some issues that are going on into your current setup, which is on-prem, you should first try to rectify them, because the moment you take your problems to your cloud, it will also scale and magnifying along with them.
Yeah.
So that is one thing which has to be acknowledged. So whenever you do the planning, and then we are part of those planning processes. So whenever we do the planning, we have to ensure that first of all, we have to try to get everything's fine on-prem. If there are some problems, rectify it on-prem and then move to cloud. Because once it moves to cloud, then it becomes much more, even the problem becomes scalable. Your
It
solution
becomes double the effort.
Right from day one, when you plan, it has to be important. Second, and this might be very cliche, but again, it is not being followed. What kind of migration strategy suits your problem statement? That has to be, that has to be figured out very early in the journey. You cannot leave it too late. It is not that let's move everything to cloud, let's rehost everything on the cloud. Let's just lift and shift, and then we'll see how we can optimize.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way.
And I think that will
Correct.
extend to a very long.
So if you intend that you have to modernize, then in the first iteration itself, you have to think from the mindset of modernizing.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I have to modernize, and I'm moving to cloud because I want to modernize. And it's not that I put everything, the old legacy application, move it to cloud, and then I'll see after 6 months down the line that whether I have to modernize, because then it becomes a mess.
Yeah.
The second thing that I feel is sometimes it's a people problem rather than a technology problem. So it's difficult to convince my existing team, my client's existing team who have learned and used technology in a particular way for X number of years, that now you have to go to cloud. See, eventually it's very similar. It's not that different.
Yeah.
It's not that different. The database still runs in a similar way. You have to, the GK cluster, the nodes and everything, it still runs the same way. It's just that now you're using a managed service or something. But that mind block has to be removed, and then we have to come and educate people on those things. So people problem, trying to remediate everything, the best migration strategy that you want to, even when you move to cloud, and also that feeling that cloud is that silver bullet that solves all your problem is wrong.
Yes.
Cloud is just a platform.
Correct.
Your application is running on top of that platform. All the problem, infra and everything is your responsibility. So we, in the first class of cloud, there isn't that shared responsibility model.
Yeah.
So cloud, whether it's AWS or Google Cloud, that will only take care of the underlying infra. Everything above that, the security, everything, how you manage your resources, how you manage your cost, is your responsibility. So the client should always understand that it's their responsibility. So either you do it or hire people like us to do it.
Yeah.
Don't expect Google Cloud to come and do it, because it's not their responsibility.
Correct.
And they have categorically called that out. So that confusion is there sometimes. People believe that, okay, I migrated to cloud, everything is gonna go now, everything is hunky-dory now, but it won't happen.
Yeah. So with this process coming in, how does it affect the sales cycle? Would this affect the sales cycle? That there is going to be a problem. So perhaps say they did not plan for a migration strategy, but they started the migration, and now something new has come up, and it is going to extend the timelines, and it is going to affect the budget. So does that kind of problem occur too often, or do you also kind of anticipate that these things also come in?
Yeah, it does occur sometimes. So expectation management is the key. So that generally happens because obviously it's very difficult to call someone's baby ugly, because people have been working on that particular application or that particular technology for quite some time. So they are not ready to accept certain changes or certain fallacies of their own. And sometimes what happens is that say in the partner ecosystem, a partner is brought in by the OEM, and OEM has set a very different expectation. So to give you an example, say for example, if you talk to any CTO who's fascinated by Gen AI, and you go and talk to them, and they would expect ChatGPT to come in and do the coding on behalf of, say, a few of their developers, which is just not possible at this point in time, and I don't think it would be possible in the next few years also, realistically speaking. So that happens with respect to cloud as well, that there are certain migrations happening, and that derails the sales process at some certain times as well. So the sign off is delayed, the sign off is postponed. The expectation is that everything would be taken care of. But yeah, that does affect the sales cycle. Yes. Maybe Sanjay can share some beautiful examples as well.
I think you have pretty much already covered it, right? Ankit also covered it very beautifully, right? These incidents happen quite often, right? But at the end, you have to sit with the customer, the technical people, your team, project management team, right? And arrive at a conclusion that what needs to be done. So it's a problem, but there is a solution for every problem, but there has to be a very transparent communication with all the stakeholders involved.
What is that emerging trend that you have seen coming through the recent times? Have you noticed anything in specific that this is going to be the next big thing?
So I think in the last couple of years, right, with the explosion of Gen AI, right, everybody is talking about Gen AI, right? Elon Musk, right, investing billions of dollars in his new data center, new company XAI, right? You must have heard his data center Colossus, right, where he is deploying 100,000 NVIDIA latest chip, right? We have data centers where such expensive chips are just few thousands, but he's talking about 100,000 such chips, right? So I think the technology is already taking a paradigm shift, right? LLMs, right? There is so much automation happening within the cloud space itself, right? There are so many functions which will be very highly automated, right? By Gen AI. So technology is taking a very huge leap of faith, right? And it is something which will impact multiple industries, whether it's manufacturing, banking, logistics, anything, right? So the future looks very, very exciting, not just for the companies, but for people in the sales and account management also, right? Because there are so many exciting things happening around, right? The future looks very lucrative for cloud, right? You know, but there is one point, right, which I'll just tell as I'm closing the marker. But I have seen that these large CSPs, right, whatever they do, right, in terms of new technology, new product, right, the companies or industries have to follow that suit, right? They have come up with LLMs, Gen AI. We have to follow that suit, right? Obviously, they are burning trillions of dollars into R&D, right? Whatever they are coming up with is the future. So yeah, that's pretty much. It's looking very, very exciting, very, very lucrative. Hope it goes quite good for India also.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like up until a few years back, we were talking about Industry 4.0. Now there are already talks about Industry 5.0. So obviously, Gen AI will change a lot of jobs for better or worse. But the change is gonna come in. We have seen a lot of traditional companies uh, change their ways, automate a lot of processes, and build in a few processes to provide better services to their customers. Companies will become much more competitive. In some cases, go to market will improve. So, for example, for a company like, say, it was Pfizer or AstraZeneca, whichever like came up with the COVID.
AstraZeneca.
I believe they
Yeah.
used AI to a great extent to do trials and do computations using AI models and stuff. Companies will become much more competitive. Things will and the job descriptions are going to change for a lot more people. But then yeah, that's the change that is going to happen. But then at the same time, what I also expect people to do is, obviously after this cloud has gone and people just understand to evaluate technology better and adopt it only when it aligns with their business goals, and just do not adopt it just for the sake of adopting it.
Yeah.
So that is something that I expect people to do, because that's the same thing to do. Yeah At least I hope it happens. Yeah.
The way things are changing, as Sanjay told it, those big hyperscalers who are putting in so much of money and effort in devising. So they are devising the way industry is moving, the way the cloud industry is moving. We have to follow suit. It is very dynamic, and our sales strategy, the way we have to sell to customers, is also going to change every day. So in simple word, it's very exciting, but we have to be on our toes. The things which were selling maybe a year back will not sell together, even if the margins that we're giving for anything any service that you provide 2 years back will not be valid today. So adapt and move on. I think that's the way to look forward.
Okay, cool. So that was the end of our podcast, and this was the first time I'm doing an in-person podcast, so this felt really special. Thank you so much, guys, for making it. How was your experience?
It was great, Udesh. I think we should thank you for making us debut on your podcast, as whether in person or not in person. This was for me the first one. I think for all of us, this was our first experience, and it was lovely.
In fact, I would also share that somebody who I started the podcast with is now doing exceptionally well with their own initiatives.
Okay.
So her name is Alba. So she worked in Amazon. She's still working in Amazon.
Okay.
She is based out of Luxembourg. So I started my first episode with her.
So this was during COVID times.
This was in early 2021.
Okay.
So she's now doing exceptionally well. She's leading a lot of initiatives across Germany, Luxembourg, and throughout the Europe region. And she recently won an award also a couple of months back. So
Great.
It's a good sign for us also,
so
right?
you guys would also be doing something big, and I wish you guys also to do something even bigger.
Sure.
Wow, nice.
Yeah. So how was your experience?
So yeah, first of all, thank you. Like this was my podcast experience as well, like in person, not in person, irrespective. So it was good talking to people and having a very casual conversation about a lot of these things. So these things are like a very like there is a lot of animated conversation that happens in office around migration with clients and with stakeholders, with our leadership. So it was good to have like a very casual conversation and also gain a good perspective, different viewpoints from Sanjay, Ankit, you. So yeah, it was good.
Yeah, thank you, Desh, for this opportunity. So very fruitful discussion, I believe. Some very interesting questions, and the viewpoints from Ankit and Vaibhav were really informative. So thanks again for this opportunity, and I hope we'll do it one more time, maybe in future somewhere.
Absolutely, I would love to have you back.
You can also shoot a video of after podcast party that you're gonna throw on podcast. Post of that. That also got many views.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much for making this happen. This was my first in-person podcast, and this was phenomenal. Thank you for making this happen, and I'm sure the audience would also have a lot to take away from this. And of course, I have also learned from each other a lot of things within this discussion. So thank you for making this happen.
Do you also need to do like and subscribe?
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys can also request my audience.
Yes.
So
Please
definitely.
follow this
Thumbs
on
up for
YouTube.
Cloud Pilot. Yes.
Yes, sir. Thumbs up.
Not on this. Cloud Pilot.
Cloud.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Thank you so
Sure.
much.